The lease agreement wasn't the most painful thing I signed that autumn, but it was the one that finally made my daughter look at me differently. Not as her mother, but as a problem she hadn't budgeted for. I remember sitting in my car outside their house on a Thursday evening in October, looking at the porch light they'd left on. It was the kind of small courtesy that used to mean something. I sat there a moment longer than I needed to. I'm 63 years old. I've worked in healthcare administration for 31 years. I manage budgets that run into the millions. I know what a line of credit looks like when it's been maxed out and quietly rolled into a home equity loan. I know what it looks like when someone is spending more than they earn and has been doing it so long they've stopped noticing. I noticed. I work out of an office in Mississauga, though I've lived in Hamilton my whole life. My husband passed 8 years ago. A heart attack, very sudden, the kind you don't see coming even when you've been watching for signs. After that, I worked more. Not to distract myself, though maybe that too. Mostly because the work was there, and I was good at it, and it turns out that being good at something is its own quiet comfort when everything else has gone sideways. My daughter is 34. Her husband is 36. They have one child, little boy just turned 2. They live in a 4-bedroom semi-detached in Oakville that they bought at the top of the market in 2022. My son-in-law is a project manager at a tech firm downtown. My daughter was working in marketing until last year when she went on parental leave and then, quietly, without much discussion, decided not to go back. I didn't have a strong opinion about that at first. Staying home with a young child is a legitimate choice. It's not the choice I made, but I understand it. What I didn't understand, not until that October evening, was what they expected to happen next. It started the way these things always start, a casual comment over dinner. My daughter mentioning that childcare in Oakville was absolutely brutal. And it is. Genuinely, daycare costs in the GTA are not something I'd wave away. She wasn't wrong about the numbers. She was just wrong about what those numbers had to do with me. "We've been running the numbers," she said, and she glanced at her husband, and he did the thing he always does where he lets her do the talking. "And honestly, Mom, with you paying rent in Hamilton and us having this extra space, it just makes so much sense. You could move in here. You'd have the whole basement. It's finished. It's got its own bathroom." I put my fork down. I didn't say anything right away. I've learned, over the years, that silence is often the most useful tool at a dinner table. "You're almost at retirement age," she continued. "You could start winding down. And it would mean the world to us, to him," she said, nodding toward where her little boy was pushing peas around his plate. "He adores you. He does adore me." That part was true, and it landed exactly the way she meant it to. "How much is daycare?" I asked. $1,900 a month, my son-in-law said. It was the first thing he'd said in about 20 minutes, and that's for 3 days a week. If we wanted 5 days, we're looking at close to $3,000, and the after-school program for when he's older, my daughter added. "We have to think about that too." I nodded slowly. "And what would I be doing, exactly?" "Just being here," she said, making it sound very simple. "Helping out. You know, you're already so wonderful with him." I asked if they'd looked into the Canada-wide Early Learning and Childcare Agreements, the federal subsidy program. My son-in-law said they had looked into it, but the wait lists were long. I said I understood, and I finished my dinner and I drove home. What they didn't know is that I'd already been running my own numbers. It started about 6 weeks earlier, when my daughter mentioned offhandedly that my son-in-law's mother, a woman I'll call her mother-in-law here, to keep things clear, was coming to stay with them for a month. She lived in Victoria and they flew her out. I asked if she was helping with the baby. My daughter said yes, but breezily, like it was barely worth mentioning. What she didn't mention was anything about whether this woman was being compensated for her time. I found out through my grandson, of all people. 2-year-olds are not reliable narrators, but they are occasionally useful. He told me, in his fragmented way, that Nana Victoria had brought him a toy and that Mommy gave her a special card. I filed that away. It meant something, or it meant nothing. I wasn't sure yet. Then my daughter called me one evening to ask if I could transfer her $200 because they were a bit short this month. This was not the first time she'd asked. Over the previous year, I'd transferred money 4 times, small amounts, 200 here, 300 there. I'd done it without comment because I love her, and because it never occurred to me that it was part of a pattern I should be tracking. But I am a woman who tracks things for a living. So I started a spreadsheet. Not to use against them. I want to be very clear about that. I started it the way I start every spreadsheet, because I needed to see the shape of something I could only partially feel, and the shape of this thing, once I could see it, was troubling. I tracked the transfers I'd made. I noted the dates. I noted what I knew about their expenses. Things my daughter had mentioned casually over the phone. Things visible in their lifestyle, things she'd complained about or celebrated. Their mortgage payment, which I knew because I'd co-signed as a guarantor when they bought the house. Their car payments. They have 2 vehicles, both purchased new, both financed. The private toddler program my grandson attends 3 mornings a week, which my daughter described as basically essential. It's not like real daycare. I added what I knew about their income. My son-in-law's salary I could estimate from what he'd told me the year he got promoted. He'd been proud of it, and he'd said the number. My daughter had been earning roughly $80,000 a year before she stopped working. Parental leave through EI had replaced part of that, but that was done now. The picture was not good. They were, by my estimate, spending somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000 more per year than they were earning. The line of credit that had helped them through the parental leave period was not small. Their credit card balances, which my daughter had mentioned once in passing and clearly regretted mentioning, were not small either. And I found something else. I have a financial advisor, a very practical woman in Burlington, who has managed my RSP and my investments since my husband died. She is discreet and thorough, and she calls me every quarter. About 2 months before that October dinner, she'd flagged something. Not to alarm me, she said, but to make sure I was aware. When I'd co-signed the mortgage in 2022, it had been under the understanding that my daughter and son-in-law would carry the payments themselves. They had, until recently. But there had been a missed payment, one, and then a late payment the following month. My name is on that mortgage. My advisor said it wasn't a crisis yet, but she thought I should know that the interest rates had made things materially worse than what was projected when they'd signed, and that my son-in-law had apparently inquired about refinancing options. Refinancing, she noted, would likely require my ongoing involvement as a guarantor or co-borrower, meaning they would need to demonstrate I still had income and financial standing, which meant that if I retired, their refinancing options became significantly more complicated. I sat with all of this for several weeks. I'm not a dramatic person by nature. I don't enjoy confrontation. I come from a family where things were handled quietly and practically, and I've tried to carry that forward. But I also know what happens when you let problems slide because they're uncomfortable to address. I watched my own parents do it, and I swore, sitting at their kitchen table when I was 17 years old, that I would not be that person. So I made a call to a financial planner I hadn't spoken to in a couple of years. Someone who specialized in family financial situations, the complicated kind. I told him what I knew. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked me 2 questions. The first was whether I had anything in writing from when I'd co-signed the mortgage. I did. The second was whether I had considered what I actually wanted. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. What I wanted was for my daughter to be okay. I wanted my grandson to be healthy and cared for. I wanted my son-in-law to stop looking vaguely panicked whenever money came up in conversation. I wanted my retirement, the one I had spent 3 decades building carefully, contributing to my RRSP every year, adjusting my investments through 2 market crashes, living below my means in a way that my daughter had always found slightly inspiriting. I wanted that retirement to belong to me. That was not a selfish thing to want. I printed out my spreadsheet. I put it in a folder. I called my daughter and told her I'd like to come for dinner on Thursday, and that I had some things I wanted to discuss. She sounded pleased. She said she'd make my favorite, which is her roast chicken with the lemon and tarragon. She's a genuinely good cook, and it's genuinely my favorite. I sat in the car for a moment before going in. The porch light was on. He, my little grandson, had drawn something on a piece of paper and taped it to the front door. It was a person with a very large head and stick arms. I assumed it was me. I brought the folder inside. Dinner was lovely. It always is with them, at the surface level. My daughter has an instinct for atmosphere. She lights candles, she puts on music, she makes the table feel like something intentional. My son-in-law poured me a glass of a very decent Ontario Red and told me about a project he was working on. My grandson ate approximately 4 bites of chicken and then asked to be excused to go play with his trucks. After he went to bed, my daughter handles the whole bedtime routine with enormous efficiency and love. I'll say that for her. The 3 of us sat back down with the wine and my daughter said, "So, you said you wanted to talk." "I did," I said. I put the folder on the table but didn't open it yet. "We've been thinking about the basement idea," she said. "We could put in a separate entrance even. You'd have real privacy. It wouldn't feel like—" "Tell me about your mother," I said. She blinked. "What?" "Your mother-in-law," I said, looking at son-in-law. "The month she was here in the spring. Was she compensated for her time?" There was a pause that lasted a moment too long. "We gave her some money," my son-in-law said carefully, "to thank her for coming out." "How much?" I asked. Another pause. "Mom," my daughter said, "why does that matter?" "I'm curious," I said. I kept my voice the way I keep it at work when I'm reviewing a budget that doesn't quite add up. Calm, interested, genuinely curious. "We gave her $800, my son-in-law said. "For the month, that's very reasonable," I said. $800 for a month of full-time childcare in one of the most expensive regions in the country is extremely reasonable. Neither of them said anything. "What I'm wondering," I continued, "is whether that's the arrangement you're imagining for me as well." "It's different," my daughter said, and her voice had gone a little flat. "You're my mother." "I am," I agreed. I opened the folder. I didn't slide it across the table dramatically. I just opened it and set it facing them so they could see the first page, which was a simple summary. Total transfers I'd made to them in the previous 14 months, $4,200. The co-signing arrangement on the mortgage. The 2 payments I'd been made aware had been late. The estimated gap between their income and their expenses. I'd kept that estimate conservative. I'd given them every reasonable benefit of the doubt, and it still showed what it showed. My daughter looked at it and then looked at me. "Where did you get some of this?" she asked. "I'm a guarantor on your mortgage," I said. "I have a right to know when payments are being missed. My financial advisor flagged it." "It was one missed payment," my son-in-law said. He was looking at the table. "I know," I said, "and it might well be an anomaly. I hope it is. But here's the thing." I turned to the next page, which I'd titled, because I couldn't help myself, "Current Picture." "You're asking me to retire," I said, "which means leaving a job I have 4 more good years in, at minimum. It means stopping contributions to my RRSP at the exact moment when they make the most difference. It means reducing my income to pension and investment draws, starting earlier than planned. It means, and this is the part I want you to really hear, that I would no longer qualify as a co-borrower or guarantor for any refinancing you might need to do. My advisor tells me you've been asking about refinancing." My son-in-law looked up then. He started to say something. I held up one hand, gently, the way you do when you want someone to know you're not angry, just not done yet. "I've done the math," I said, "and I need you to understand that I love you both, and I love that little boy upstairs more than I have words for. But what you're describing, me moving into your basement, providing full-time childcare, retiring early, it is not a small ask. It would cost me, conservatively, somewhere between $60,000 and $90,000 over the next 4 years. In retirement contributions I wouldn't make. In the value of my pension, reduced by early drawdown. In the market gains I'd be missing, and it would remove me as a viable guarantor at a time when you may very much need one." The room was quiet. My daughter had her hands around her wine glass. She wasn't drinking from it. She was looking at the spreadsheet, the way people look at something they didn't expect to see. "We didn't think of it that way," she said, finally. "I know," I said, and I said it gently because I meant it gently. She genuinely hadn't. "I know my daughter. She is not calculating. She is not a bad person." She was drowning a little, and she looked toward the nearest solid thing, which happened to be me, and she grabbed. "That's not malice. That's just what people do when they're scared, and they haven't yet looked hard at what they're asking." "Here's what I can do," I said. I flipped to the last page, which I'd titled, more optimistically, "What actually works. I can continue to be your guarantor as long as I'm working, which protects your refinancing options. I can take the baby on Fridays. The whole day, every week, as long as I'm physically able to. That saves you roughly $400 to $500 a month in daycare costs, depending on the rate. I can help you think through your budget. Genuinely help, not judge. Actually help. Because I've been doing this professionally for 30 years, and I can see 3 or 4 places in what you've told me over the past year where real money is leaving without much return." My son-in-law was leaning forward now. He was listening the way he listens when he's actually taking something in. "What I cannot do," I said, "is retire into your basement and become a full-time caregiver for free while telling myself it's a lifestyle choice and not an economic arrangement that benefits you at my expense." My daughter made a sound that was something between a laugh and not a laugh. "You've really thought about this. I think about things," I said. "You know that about me." She was quiet for a moment. Her husband reached over and put his hand on hers, which was the right instinct, and I was glad to see it. "The mortgage payments," she said eventually, "they won't be late again. We had a shortfall because we had some credit card things come up that we hadn't anticipated. I'd like to understand that better," I said. "Not to scrutinize you, to help if I can." She nodded slowly. We talked for another 2 hours. Not the way people talk when they're managing appearances. The way you talk when the appearance has already been set aside, and you're just dealing with the actual thing underneath it. My son-in-law told me more than he'd ever told me in 9 years. About the car purchases that had seemed manageable at the time. About a renovation they'd done to the upstairs bathroom that had gone significantly over budget. About the credit cards, which were more than I'd estimated and less than the worst case I'd imagined. I told him, at one point, that I wasn't there to be their parent. I was there to be useful. There's a difference, and it matters. My daughter asked me, near the end of the evening, why I hadn't just said no at the first dinner. Why the folder? Why the spreadsheet? Why the whole production of it? I thought about that. "Because no by itself doesn't change anything," I said. "You'd have found another way to ask. Or you'd have felt hurt and we'd have let it sit there and go wrong slowly. I needed you to see the same picture I was seeing." She looked at me for a moment. "That spreadsheet is terrifying," she said. "That's the point of spreadsheets," I said. I drove home along the 403 with the radio off. It was almost 11 o'clock and the highway was quiet. Those long, amber-lit stretches that I've driven so many times in my life, they've become a kind of punctuation. I thought about my husband, which I do sometimes on drives like this. He would have been useful in that conversation in a way that would have made it easier and also slightly less precise. He was the warmth in the room. I am the math. I'm both. Now. I've had to be. The Friday arrangement has been running for 4 months. My grandson and I have a routine. We go to Pier 4 Park when the weather holds. We make very bad drawings of dinosaurs at my kitchen table. We eat peanut butter sandwiches and watch half an episode of something before he starts to fade. He calls me Grandma Loretta in a way that sounds like it's been his word for me his whole life, like he invented it. My daughter and son-in-law are working with a financial advisor now, not mine, a different one. Someone younger who came recommended by a colleague. They've refinanced. I'm still on the documentation, still working, still contributing to my retirement. The credit cards are lower than they were, though not gone. She called me last week to tell me they'd crossed the halfway point on one of them. She sounded like herself, proud, a little sheepish, wanting me to know, without quite knowing how to say, that she knew the conversation in October had mattered. I told her I was glad. I meant it. I did not tell her I'd already updated the spreadsheet. Some things are better left as mine.